All right, well, welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining. Jervin, I haven't seen you for like 7 years, so that's great. So today we are going to talk about building an open source MongoDB compatible database on top of PostgreSQL. My name is Peter Farkas. I'm the CEO of FerretDB. And with me, we have Alexey Palazhchenko, our CTO. Alexey, can you still hear us and can you still talk?
Yes, at least I hope so.
Okay, we can hear you. Great. All right, so our agenda for today is pretty simple. First, we're going to introduce FerretDB to talk about the reasons why we need MongoDB compatibility on Postgres, because we are getting that question very, very often. Then we are going to talk about FerretDB's concept and the current progress, the implementation itself, some architecture. Alexey is also going to do a little demo, and then we will have time for your questions. We're already running late, so I'm probably going to rush through some sections. So first of all, the co-founders and who are we? So we have Alexey Palazhchenko as our co-founder. He's an ex-Perconian, so some of you here, but I'm sure you know who Alexey is. He's a Go developer. He's got 10 plus years of experience in developing in Go. We also have Peter Zaitsev as our other co-founder. I'm not sure if I should introduce him at all. He's the CEO of Percona. And I'm also an ex-Perconian. I led the support team some 7-10 years ago at Percona. And I mainly worked for open source companies like Cloudera, Percona, and consulted for many. And these are some photos of us, and actually one of them is very much relevant. So I really didn't want to go into a lot of details on how we came up with this idea, but we actually went to this Himalaya trip last July 2021, and it was like 5 days walking distance away from civilization. It was like a very remote area, walking on glaciers and all that. And in that wilderness, like away from everything, you have a lot of worries on your mind, like what will you drink, what will you eat, and also one of the worries which kept us awake was the state of the open source document database market. So if you take a look at the Stack Exchange, survey, out of 72K respondents, they asked the question, which database environments have you done extensive development work in over the past year, and which do you want to work in over the next year? And 50% of them, that's not surprising, chose MySQL as one of the databases. After that was Postgres with 40%. And the first choice for NoSQL was MongoDB. And then we also have Redis the list, but that's kind of different than MongoDB. So what is the issue with this chart? So we think that the issue with this chart is that we have a leading NoSQL database which was open source a while ago, but it's no longer open source. So MongoDB is insanely popular. It's loved by developers, but it's released under the SSPL license. We are on an open source conference, so you probably understand the implications of SSPL. Basically, if you are providing any service with MongoDB in a cloud environment, then you may potentially have to open source everything like including your application and the software you created the application with, and so on and so on. So we do think that that's unacceptable, especially for a popular database like that. You can learn more on this very angry but great website, ssplisbad.com, on why SSPL is bad. And also on the Percona blog, Peter Zaitsev and Matt Yankovic had some articles about it, so that's also great literature on the implications or possible implications of SSPL. So let's look at the alternatives which are not released under SSPL but would still be relevant if you would want MongoDB compatibility. So we have Amazon's DocumentDB, which is pretty much tied to Amazon. We have Microsoft Azure, which is tied to Azure. We have IBM Informix, which is surprisingly capable of being MongoDB compatible. And very recently, Oracle also introduced the DB API. Now, of course, these are still not open source. And we tried to figure out whether we are alone with this feeling that this is not exactly good. And we talked to potential users. We talked to companies, with small businesses, but they kind of shared the same sentiment that MongoDB right now comes with huge potential for the lock-in situation. So either you use MongoDB, you start using MongoDB Atlas, but then you're not really able to migrate anywhere else. And these are just some quotes we've collected from potential users. Okay, so summarize, we think that there is a need for an open source alternative to MongoDB, and it needs to be compatible with the existing MongoDB ecosystem, which is a great ecosystem. It's full of tools, it's full of capable users, capable developers, and a lot of apps which are using MongoDB. So we established that we need a MongoDB compatible alternative. So what is FerretDB? So we could go a lot of different ways. Like, let's build an MongoDB. Let's build a database. Let's do everything from zero. Of course, we can't do this in a competitive way because it takes 10+ years to actually produce a database which you are okay with using in production. So the concept of FerretDB is a bit different. So FerretDB is a MongoDB compatible interface. We are set out to become the de facto MongoDB alternative. We would like this to be used either on-prem or in the cloud. And we also want to implement it in a pluggable way, where even though we are mentioning Postgres many times during this presentation, we really want it to work with a number of different databases, not just Postgres. And of course, most importantly, we are dead set on using a pure open source license, Apache 2.0. Hi. So, so what we mean by MongoDB compatibility is that all of the existing elements of the MongoDB ecosystem, whether these are tools or applications, will be possible to be used with FerretDB. So ideally, if you're running an application on FerretDB, the application itself should not even know that it is not running on MongoDB at the moment without any modification. This is our goal, and this is the concept. Let me explain how are we going to do this in terms of licensing. So as you can see, two separate elements of MongoDB out there. There are the MongoDB drivers, which developers are using extensively, and this is a of programming languages and very easy to use. It's actually awesome, and probably this is the reason why MongoDB is so popular. Much easier to use than Redis, for example. And these drivers are released under Apache 2.0 because these drivers can be part of an actual software. You can't really use a very restrictive license when releasing them. And there's the MongoDB backend, which is the one released under SSPL. So the MongoDB backend is the only thing which is replaced by Amazon and Microsoft and all the MongoDB-compatible providers, and not the drivers. Of course, there are alternative drivers, but this is irrelevant for us at the moment. So what we are going to have the MongoDB drivers, and in this example and in the coming releases, Postgres, which is released under an open source license. And we have FerretDB between them, capable of interpreting the MongoDB wire protocol and store and read data from a database engine like Postgres. Sometimes one query per MongoDB query, but there can be many queries per one MongoDB query. So as you can see with FerretDB, you get compatibility and you are fully under an open source license. So the current progress, we launched on the 1st of November 2021. We did not really expect that this is going to be as quick as it was. Featured on a lot of different relevant news sites like Hacker News and Reddit, and a lot of blogs and a lot of experts were contacting us about it. We received like 4.4K GitHub stars, a lot of forks, and we have about 30 open source contributors as well. There is growing interest from customers. We have partnerships going on, and we released version 0.2, which is capable of running CLA Assistant. That's the first application which is capable of running on FerretDB without having to use MongoDB. So who are the potential users? Just very quickly, those who would want to avoid vendor lock-in. So our number one goal is that FerretDB should be used by many different providers, creating competition, creating awareness of the importance of open source. We want all of the cloud providers to enable FerretDB to become an alternative to all the existing solutions. We are open to working with any current MongoDB user right now. And of course, it depends on the use case, but we think that 80% of MongoDB users will be able to use FerretDB as an alternative. Very quickly, why did we choose PostgreSQL? So if you've seen the diagram on the Stack Exchange survey, so Postgres is becoming the relational database of choice, fully open source, huge community, proud community. They are proud of Postgres. They want to create more use cases for Postgres, and they want to work with us, and we want to work with them to enable us to create an even more seamless experience with MongoDB. They have existing JSON compatibility, and we are going to use that for a while, but we also have plans to develop our own.
Yeah.
So
Yes, so we had some. Yeah. So the problem was that the question was whether we are already in touch with the Postgres community, especially in connection with the JSON group. So we also would like to show some real world applications to like show the that we are taking and we are to progress. So in order to get their support, I think we would also need to prove that we are going to actually do this, and I think it's already visible. So definitely we are going to start working with them.
We can certainly understand from an open source standpoint the affinity with Postgres. Question is there JSON compatibility? Is that much different from like what you see with all the other relational databases at this point? I mean, it's just another checkbox that they just happen to hit, or do they hit it better than you think other relational databases?
We think that Postgres is by far the best choice out of all the other.
In terms of their JSON.
Yeah. Alexey, I'm not sure if you have deeper thoughts on this, but
I can answer that. I'm okay. Postgres community, each other.
Yeah.
So I think out of the JSON SQL standards, 14 out of 15 were so, and I think number 15 has been taken care of.
Right.
So Postgres is the most compliant with the SQL standards, right?
So that's SQL.
Yeah. So now the special JSON working group is aiming to make Postgres the best database for any JSON workload, not just the static.
that's what we're saying. Yep. Okay. So we have all the reasons to use Postgres for now, but I wanted to stress or emphasize this that we want to design FerretDB as a pluggable, modular way of using different databases as we move forward. So we got a lot of requests from MySQL. So if you think about it, if someone wants to, so if someone's got operational expertise in running MySQL or Postgres, for some reason want to achieve MongoDB compatibility as well, if they have FerretDB, they don't really have to do much. They just have to start using FerretDB and still they would be maintaining the same infrastructure. So with that, the floor is Alexey's. And Alexey, I'm going to try my best to make this larger for everyone to see. I'm not sure how can I hide myself as best as I can. Okay, Alexey, can you hear us and can we hear you?
Yes, I hope you can hear me, I hope you can see me, and hope you can see the screen.
Yeah.
Can you please mute, because
Yeah, sure.
So
wait, this is very challenging because I have a okay.
yes. Yeah, so I'm speaking with you because the ocean, so the delay is quite big and echo is not so small. So the architecture diagram of FerretDB, how FerretDB works with PostgreSQL and unmodified that use MongoDB is very simple. So FerretDB is just a stateless proxy between those clients and intercepts connection from those unmodified clients that converts PostgreSQL where data is stored, gets some data back and converts them back to MongoDB protocol messages and sends them back to the clients. So in theory, that should be all easy, and we, from the very start, we knew that if there's some complicated command like pipeline with several steps. We could present to several queries and send them parallel to and then convert all results together, or we can do something else. So in future, that should be quite easy to convert queries to PostgreSQL queries. We'll see how we do that in practice. But I heard there are questions about how we store data, whether we use JSON, and how we use it, so I will start with that. First, we use JSON-B data type to store data in PostgreSQL, but JSON data type is quite different from BSON. So MongoDB uses BSON, which stands for binary JSON, as I say. In practice, it's quite different data type with some additional, much more types there in BSON documents, and also some very big difference. So let's see what we have. The first BSON field order is significant in BSON, unlike JSON, and JSON-B extension does not preserve the field order. By default, it sorts all fields, so it makes easier to index. BSON document. And the first field of the document describes the command to be, for example, give update. So of course, field order is important. You'll just not know what command to run. And if how we solve this problem, we basically just add another key to the document which is not visible for users of the FerretDB, but inside we just keep the original. And then we key field. So another problem is BSON documents actually duplicate fields, and if there are some MongoDB experts in the room right now, it can be hard. Do they really? Yeah, it looks they do. We don't aware of any use case for that. We don't know if many people actually know that that's possible. And not in all languages, BSON document to some data structure which is dictionary or hash map which doesn't preserve the duplicate fields. So what how we're going to support that, we just without. So if there is any use case for duplicate fields we are not aware. If you know, then please let us know, and we can maybe answer. Another thing is in BSON field can start with very different letters, and especially the dollar sign. As you own the ones on previous screen, we reserve the dollar sign K for order fields. So what happens if BSON document has some fields with the same name? And historically, MongoDB did not support fields that start with dollar sign or with dot in the middle well before. Starting from version 5, I think they support them using special operators, get field, insert field. So in practice, no one uses them because like they're not all the benefits, and in most cases you can just rename your fields. That's very easy. So how we support those fields? Again, we just don't. We are not aware of any use cases for that. So the most important difference that BSON just have much more data types than JSON. So in JSON we basically just have strings, numbers, which are JavaScript numbers, so there are no real integer types, for example. So booleans, and then of course arrays and objects. And in BSON we have much more types. For example, we have two types for integer numbers, for longer integer numbers and shorter integer numbers. We have some specific types like timestamp, which is not type, it's different from type, it's more or less internal type in MongoDB, or how users can use it. And of course, some very, very specific types for MongoDB, like JavaScript code. So that could give you an idea that BSON is not a genuine data format. Like, probably not as simple as binary JSON. So how we support them? Again, we just use JSON object with special fields, and for integer numbers, we store the JavaScript number for short, for int32. For int64, we store this object with, and for float numbers, for double numbers, we store this $f. For timestamps, we do the same with $t, and for JavaScript code, small, we don't support it. And the good thing that MongoDB doesn't support the data, it was duplicate, that it probably would be removed in the next version. So the last problem is how we compare the some values. So even if you use PostgreSQL with great support for JSON or any other database with good support or great support for JSON, the some values are compared differently compared to JSON. For example, many JSON implementation defines their own order between different types. So let's say I have a document where two documents where one field with particular name has integer value, and the other in other documents the value of that field is boolean. How we compare those two documents of types? And there are some problematic values like null, of course, plus minus infinity, because we have to support some extra types for float numbers. We have to support plus minus infinity, we have to support not a number, and of course we can, the best one, we have to support -0. So -0 value is actually not stored, and for everything else we store the So how we support different types? In MongoDB, we have to compare different values for both filtering and for sorting. For filtering, it does, most of the time, does the right thing. For example, if your filter is, if where one field is a value of some integer, it will the document where this field has a string. But it will still consider documents where this field is float numbers, for example. So it does some type conversion. And of course, for sorting, and of course, there's problematic values from previous slides, even bigger problem there. So let me give you some examples. For example, when we sort documents by some field, we can get this. So not a number, which is like a special value in arithmetics and computer arithmetics, doesn't not compare with any other value. In MongoDB, it is actually less than any specific number. For example, not a number is less than 1. Null is less than not a number, which is kind of makes sense, maybe not, depending on how you think about it. Less than null. Array is one element with null inside. That doesn't make much sense. So if, for example, you could say, okay, so is null element inside. And also, so 2 previous lines you can say, okay, so how null compares to array with one element which is null? Is it null less than array with that element or not? Turns out it really depends on the sorting order. If you sort the documents in one order, one of them will be less. In another order, the other one will be less. So if all that sounds familiar to you, that's because you watched this funny talk about JavaScript. It's called Log, and if you never watched it, I highly recommend it. That's very, very short, very funny talk. So in short, you have to support all this comparison if you want to be compatible with MongoDB. Of course, you can say, okay, we are not going to be compatible in that small aspects, but then probably someone will run the application against FerretDB, see that some tests fail, okay, it's not really compatible, and they will just leave and not consider FerretDB in the future. So we have to be compatible in that aspect. So let's go back to the diagram. So we got this request from MongoDB driver that should get some documents from PostgreSQL and sort them according to those strange rules. And PostgreSQL does not compare the values the same way we wanted to compare. So how we do that? Our original plan was to just build a SQL query set to PostgreSQL, and that the query became more and more and more complex as we added more special cases and special all those virtual values. So we decided to make it much simpler and also much more simplified. We decided to do the load comparison in Go, in FerretDB Go. And that means for each request, we basically fetch all data from collection. So if you have a collection with a lot of documents, we fetch all of them and then filter and sort in Go code. And yeah, we understand that's not good from perspective of performance and also like from many other aspects, but that's easy for us to do and easy for us to get all those weird corner cases. And then we add great integration tests. I will speak about them a bit later. And then once we have all those integration tests of RDB and we know all those corner cases, we can improve performance. There are several options for that in PostgreSQL and even more options in other databases if we want to support them in the future. So right now, what we decided, we will translate the Go code into PgSQL functions and use them. That's not a final plan. That's what we are going to do as we know that now, but we may consider in the future. Maybe we'll write our own extension or our own data type in PostgreSQL. Right now, that seems like the easiest way for us to move forward, but who knows what will be in the future. So speaking of integration tests, how we test FerretDB, first of all, we write our own test which connects to both FerretDB and MongoDB, and this test uses a visual code driver for MongoDB. We basically send the same commands to both FerretDB and MongoDB and have the results. And your driver in the test can see the difference, and we behave just like MongoDB. That's good enough for the driver, and that's good enough for us. Then there are tests of existing applications. For example, driver itself has a good suite of tests, and we run them against FerretDB to see what tests fail and what not. And also, we target some specific applications, for example, CLI systems that we targeted in the previous release. We wanted to push forward with FerretDB to implement just enough functionality for CLI system tests to pass. So now CLI system tests pass against FerretDB, and that means we support it. And of course, MongoDB has their own tests. They have a separate repository which powers websites such as is document.db MongoDB yet? And their answer is no, because most of the tests they run against MongoDB and document.db fail. And we are planning to run the same test to see where they are compatible with MongoDB or where not. In the future, we'll have a similar score to them. So let me do some quick demo what FerretDB can do now. So here I'm having FerretDB running on top. And below I just run the normal Mongo shell. Connects to FerretDB. We see that that's FerretDB version released today, and also it asks us to start us on the GitHub. So on top,
Alexey, can you hear me? Just one thing. So,
yes.
Can you actually make it a bit larger, like as large as you can? Is it better?
Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. So on top, you will see this strange output. That's another aspect of our integration tests. So what you do here, there is a special mode of running FerretDB. When it gives a command from the client application, it sends the same package of this query and all metadata to MongoDB. Response from MongoDB and then process the same packet itself and log the difference between responses. So in that case, you see that when my client connected, the only difference was basically in packet IDs, right? And now the difference in body response is 0. So let me try to run some queries. For example, I use value database and then run the simple query. And on top, if I scroll that quickly, you will see, yeah, the body difference is still empty. And here you can see the outputs and yeah. And another application then also works and the version we released today is a plugin for Visual Studio Code. So they have a plugin for MongoDB and where you can run queries, explore tables, and it all just works. So if I, for example, run this command against FerretDB, it returns values, and if I change the sorting order, you will get the good result. Yeah, so that's it. You can see that we are compatible with MongoDB for the simple queries, and in the future we plan to support more. And also that the different output is helpful for us to develop FerretDB and also for new contributors. Back to Peter.
Thanks, Alexey. Now you, yeah. Let me get back to the presentation in a sec. Okay, so we don't have much left. I still wanted to talk about the. Is my mic working? Okay, thanks. So I still want to talk about the, well, not very granular roadmap. This is just for you to get an idea. We have a pretty detailed roadmap on GitHub, but our plans for FerretDB is that by the end of Q2, we are going to support all basic MongoDB commands, and we will have stubs for the advanced commands. So, of course, there will be still no 100% compatibility with some of the advanced. By the end of Q3, this is going to improve, and that is when some of the MongoDB applications you may have in mind may have a chance to run with FerretDB. And as we are testing and developing new features, by the end of Q4, we are going to release the production-ready 1.0. We expect that most MongoDB applications will be able to run on FerretDB, and it will be usable with most tools, most MongoDB clients. We are also working with partners. So obviously, since we are developing with Postgres in mind, we are compatible with all of the Postgres-based DB as a service providers. I would name Yugabyte or anyone else. And we also have an ongoing partnership with Tigris Data. If you did not hear about them, ex-Perconian and ex-Uber Ovais Tariq and his team is working on a zero ops database as a service or data platform, and their aim is that if you want to create a real-time website or application, then you can just use their service and you don't really have to worry about the database. They're also on GitHub. So as you can see, we are working with Postgres. We want to work with the Postgres community, but anyone who is interested in providing a MongoDB-like experience for their customers or users, then we are very much interested in working with them. Well, just to summarize, FerretDB wants to make the MongoDB-like experience open source, free. We would like to see competition in this area, not just price-wise, but feature-wise as well. In the future, we may even be improving the MongoDB experience, so I don't think that we are going to stop at being compatible, but there may be a phase or a time where we will be adding features to the current experience and make it faster, like transparent caching or anything you may have in mind. So this is our plan for FerretDB. We are very excited about this project. We are very excited about the feedback, and that concludes our presentation. And if you have any questions, feel free to raise them. On top of my head, I'm not sure. So we have the full roadmap on Alexey able to answer if I would find a way to unmute him now.
Unfortunately, I did not hear the question.
Okay, so repeat.
So the MongoDB driver has certain features like read preference and write concern. Which quarter will that get supported?
Yeah, so it was required. I got the question was about MongoDB driver and write concern, and I did not get more than that, unfortunately. But yeah, we don't support write concerns yet. Of course, we plan.
So Jervin's question was more about what the plans are on. Are we going to support it? But I'm not sure if.
Now I can't hear you. Yes. No.
Okay, Jervin, I'm going to get back to you on this. I think that's easy. but so it's important to note here that we are not. So we are looking forward to support comments and features which are actually needed by the MongoDB users, and if you're thinking of one which is widely used, then it is going to be supported in FerretDB for sure. Otherwise, we are not competitive. When it comes to special features, specialties to MongoDB, I would take Amazon's DocumentDB as an example, which claims to be 30% compatible, I think, with MongoDB, and it's still possible to use MongoDB applications with them. So it depends, if there's a feature which is really needed, then that's definitely going to be in FerretDB, and the rest of it depends on the community, depends on the actual users. We are more than happy to work with anyone if there's a use case that we develop against that use case.
Yeah, the read preference is particularly important because if you have standby nodes replicas of your Postgres instances, then from the driver you get to spread out that load.
Mm-hmm.
Not particularly interested with the write concern because you can leave that up to Postgres and its replication semantics.
Yeah.
Preference can be there. That would be.
From what I'm hearing, read preference would definitely be one of the features which we would support, because it's yeah, that makes sense. All right, well, thank you so much for coming. Actually, you can help FerretDB in a variety of ways. First, you can visit us on GitHub, and second, we have this huge box of t-shirt which I think ordered a couple months ago, and we still have a lot of them. So if you fancy a FerretDB t-shirt, then I would be more than happy to give you. We also have women's sizes if you have anybody in mind. So please. So thank you so much.